It's really wonderful to be here. Thanks, Bill and Karen. If you cannot understand what I'm saying because of my accent, you have to, I don't know what you're going to do to indicate to me. I have to translate my English. But let's figure this out together. So today is 9/11, isn't it? And I'm wondering if we can just have a moment of silence. Those who can stand, if you want to stand, and maybe we just hold a moment of reflection and memory for the humanity of everybody that was involved, whether it's the perpetrators and their families, those that passed on, who died, and their families, and just the world and America. So let's just hold a moment of silent reflection. Thank you. Being born in a country like South Africa, with the kind of history that we have, I guess the struggle for me personally, and the question has always been, what does it mean to be human? You know, I don't know how many of you know anything about the history of my country. I grew up, I was born in 1970, so you can do the maths. And I'm one of 9 children, so I'm fourth eldest, somewhere there in the middle. And I was the first one in my family that was able to go to university. But the history of my country is such that we were colonized. And apparently there was it was quite interesting how, I think it was first the Europeans that wanted us, and if you come to Cape Town, like Bill and Karen will tell you, and I know some of my colleagues that I've met a couple of years ago, they're also planning to go. You will probably see why, because Cape Town and South Africa is such a beautiful place, beautiful piece of God's world. And so it was first the British, and then the Dutch, and so they got all crazy because they really wanted this land. And the sadness, I think, is, of course, the majority of the people in the population, of course, as you know, is the majority of black people. If you were born and live in Africa, chances are that you are black, right? But the unique craziness about our context is that it was the small minority of our white brothers and sisters that dominated the large majority of the population. And what was even more incredible about it is that apartheid was then instituted as a system. So the constitution of the country, all the legislation, every institution, which is your education system, politics, economics, everything, all the different systems was legislated in ways that segregated people, and so we were classified. So there were 4 categories under apartheid: whites, Indians, coloreds, so I would be colored, and then the last category or the lowest category was black or Africans. And so that category, the African and black categories, was basically all the I'm from the indigenous tribes as well, but it was all the sort of the Xhosa, Zulu, the tribal groupings were all collapsed into that particular category. And then, of course, according to that particular hierarchy was, what services you got and what you didn't get. And so the same thing with education. Education was like that. So I was not supposed to go to university, basically. And so I grew up in one of those communities. Oh, so the one thing that I need to mention is that faith and violence have been used, by the colonizers and the apartheid system to oppress and dehumanize the large majority of the population. So faith is like, it's quite a thing. But so both faith and violence have been used. And yet at the same time, faith is such a powerful resource, for people to reclaim who they are and their identity and that sort of thing. So I grew up in that context. Now, of course, I didn't know about the context within which I was born. What I do remember, though, as a child, I was little, I was playing in the sand, and I had this understanding. I was literally not just about going to school. And I had this understanding that I'm here on this earth, God brought me here, and I'm supposed to help people. And I had this notion and this understanding that this helping of people is supposed to be in the world, So I kind of had this notion, and I thought life was like a long road, and there would be people waiting for me. And my sense of God was that God is like quite majestic. I can articulate it now the way that I am, but I'm trying to let you know what were some of the things that I was thinking about as a child. And so I thought God would reveal more about who God is, over time. So, but the clarity as a child was that I am here on this earth and I'm supposed to help people. Now, when I always say the life shock for me was, because I thought it's obvious, like all of us are probably doing something. We were born to do something. And so I always say that my life shocks was when I did go to church and I discovered, oh, hold on, actually no. There's some regulations here. If you're a woman, there's certain things that you can do and there's other things that you cannot do. I was quite surprised, because I thought like, oh wow, how do I reconcile this idea of God being so majestic and personal and what do I do? Because I now have this calling that I understood. I understood it to be a calling. But here were some limitations that was clearly stipulated for me. And then, of course, the other institution that was part of my life shock as a child was when I went to school. And I discovered that being clever, being first in the class, is not for children that looked like me. And how I knew that was, there were 2 girls, they were white-looking girls, and they had long, straight hair, and I remember I was in grade 2 then, so the teacher would celebrate them when they got the most marks, and she would make a really big fuss. And then there was a time when everything was quiet, and so she would just announce that, I was the one, basically. that got the most marks. But there was absolutely no celebration. And I started to feel ashamed because it was so obvious, you know, when the celebrations happened and when there wasn't celebration. And I mean, it really impacted me quite deeply and profoundly that I didn't want to play outside because it's like the children, somehow I thought the children knew I'm not supposed to, my hair, and this was the other thing, my hair. She insisted that we had to have ribbons in our hair, but my hair was too short. And in fact, my parents couldn't afford ribbons. So, but she insisted, and so she would go and get flowers and stick it into, you know, my hair, because we all had to look a certain way. And so those were the early days as a child that I kind of like struggled with this sense of, what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be here? What does it mean to have some knowledge and some information, you know, that I thought everybody will just share? And clearly there were differences. And of course, the rest is history. As I grow older, I discovered more and more that education wasn't really supposed to be for us. I only learned about social work in my, when was it, grade 11. And social work sounded like helping people. And I said, I must do social work because it sounded like helping people. Well, I went to my parents and I said, you know, I have to study social work and there's no money. And they said, but I said, I understand that to be my calling, you know. And they said, oh, so if God wants you to do this, God is probably going to provide. You know, because the point is, well, and I always say that my struggle with, I couldn't speak English, of course, properly. I couldn't speak English. So my struggle, I had to cope with being at university. And the only way I could think of like getting through this was I had to think of it as another high school, because it was too tough, the English and anyway. So I'm giving you sort of all of a very long kind of whatever I've just given you, but just to give you a little bit of context. So faith and family for me are very critical pieces around how I have journeyed through my life. You know, in terms of, let me see, there's my mother and my father. So that's my parents, and these are my siblings. There's 9 of us, so there's seven of us are women, and the other 2 are men. And then that's me and my son, Caleb. He's with me. He's in the States here, and he was hosted by Bill and Karen a couple of weeks ago. And that's Patrick. So these are the people that continue to shape and challenge my own humanity, and for me, what it means to, and what is my place in the world? What is my place in the world? Why did I come here? What did I come to do here? And so, yeah, that's my parents. Now, what I need to say in terms of the work that I eventually got to do, because I think it was probably the clarity around what exactly I'm supposed to do, this calling business, was probably when I was in my late teens or in my teens and in my early 20s that it became clear that I'm supposed to work with men who abuse their intimate partners, and I'm supposed to work with religious leaders, you know, looking at the faith dimensions of intimate partner abuse. And so, and then the thing was also, the clarity was that it was going to be religious leaders. It was in all different religions, or, you know, varied. It wasn't just going to be the Christian tradition that I grew up in, the Pentecostal tradition that I grew up in. In fact, what I must say, when I was 8 years old, I made like a personal commitment to God. and I was a child. And for me it was literally, I'm giving my whole life to God. That was the commitment that I made. And so basically my journey of faith and family is a very important, very critical, part of how I make sense of my place and my time and what am I supposed to do here. So I was clear that I'm supposed to work with men who abuse their intimate partners. I'm supposed to work with religious leaders and faith communities. Now, I just mentioned to you that I grew up in a Pentecostal church context. And so for those of you who know, you would understand that for a woman to even begin to say, the kind of stuff that I'm supposed to work on is a bit crazy. So I couldn't really tell anybody, and I understood. I really understood that. And I usually say to people, if each one of us would really tap into what we know our calling is in life, chances are that it will be something that is a bit odd. There's like always sort of a little odd, it might be in the same vicinity, so it's social work, that's the vicinity, that's the area. But then the specific thing that you are called to often is like, it throws you a bit off because you never feel like you are capable. You never feel like you actually are credible, have the credibility to do this and the capability to do this. And so it was really tough for me to try and explain that in a context where, women had a very particular place and so forth and so on. And I guess over time I really do believe that the most important thing for any human being in this life, and this is my framing, I believe that our most important work is to figure out what is the purpose. What is the purpose with which I was created? And then secondly, we need to find the courage to live that purpose, to live that calling. And then thirdly, we need to create the support, around you to be able so that you can actually live out this calling, this purpose, this destiny. Because, like I said, oftentimes that when you really step into your purpose and your calling, it's going to sometimes be tough because you don't even understand what you're doing. You're learning as you go along. So it places you on a different path. It's not so clear. You cannot be trained in a particular way. You can be educated. Like my dad would often say, people get education mixed up. Sometimes they focus much more on the achievement of the education. And the point is that your education is supposed to assist you and support you in your calling. But oftentimes, what happens is your calling moves you to the profession. Right? My calling moved me to become a social worker, to study social work. Our calling moved us to become a politician. Our calling moved us to become whatever, but oftentimes even moves us to become a pastor or a priest or an imam, or But oftentimes what happens the day you graduate, you leave your calling there, and you take the degree, or when you are ordained. This is what I say to pastors. I say the day that you are ordained into ministry, oftentimes you leave your calling there, and you take the title. You take the thing that you perceive is going to give you power, access, influence, and that sort of thing. And so these are some of the things I believe we have to, just be mindful of and see what is my relationship with myself, with my calling, with my purpose, with my destiny. What am I doing? So when it comes to intimate partner abuse and violence, I go again back home. And in my experience, I have never seen my dad use violence, abuse, or shaming of my mother or any one of us. Now remember, I told you about the apartheid context within which we were born, right? I have witnessed how he's been treated like crap, whether it was in the church, because apartheid was very alive in the church. It was very alive in the community everywhere around us. So I've witnessed him being treated, because you see he's dark-skinned, right? And so I've witnessed how my parents had been shamed and treated, you know, whether it's by the people that for whom they worked, or just the people in general. But this incredible person, I've never seen him use violence and abuse. And oftentimes when it comes to domestic violence, sometimes people will say, oh, you know, it's very stressful, men are under a lot of stress, and they've, you know, gone through apartheid, and they've gone through all sorts of difficulty, and, you know, they come home and they release their stress at home. I have a different reality. And so my reality, I mean, I cannot imagine how one human being come into the sacred space with another human being, start from a place of love and adoration and respect, and whether it's soon enough or a couple of months later or a couple of years later, that intimate space becomes the worst, most dangerous space for people to be in. That doesn't make sense to me. And so my first job was, as a social worker, was when I worked in a shelter for abused women and children. And so there I've seen children who do not know what it is to experience a man that has never been violent. They've only experienced their dads or men that is violent and abusive towards their mother. And I've heard women say, we want the violence to stop, we don't necessarily want to end the relationship. I've heard women speak about their faith. It's like this conflict, because my faith is helping me, you know, and at the same time, you know, there's certain scriptures and teachings that I struggle with. And then my partner, whether he's actually practicing his faith or not, he knows the scriptures that, you know, that he uses to tell me I should forgive regularly, I should, you know, I should be submissive. All the scriptures, they know the scriptures whether they practice their faith or not. And so what was quite odd again for me and confusing, because when I started to go to the meetings of the organizations that work in domestic violence field, and I tried to speak about faith and men, the importance that we need to talk about that, that was taboo. You don't speak about faith, you don't speak about men. You don't even speak about perpetrators of domestic violence, because they are men. And so I sat with this conflict. I'm hearing the voices of women and the children, and this is my calling that I'm trying to get to, but I'm in a country, in a context where nobody wanted to speak about faith and about men. Now, why did I think faith was important? Faith, you know, works, I mean, it's our belief. Anything, whatever it is that you believe, the beliefs that you hold about yourself, the perceptions and beliefs that you hold about other people, that's how you will interact with them. And so in a country like South Africa, where 90% of the population affiliates to some religion, the majority of the population, of course, is Christian. Majority, which would be almost 80% of the population. So faith and Christian beliefs and, you know, all the different other beliefs, faith is important. If you study religion in relation to Africa, you know, you will come across many scholars that would say to you, for the African society, you do not separate religion from anything. It permeates everything that we do, the air that we breathe, everything. is an act of worship, is part of who we are, people of faith. And so for me then, it made complete sense that unless we talk about faith, because now remember, faith was also used during apartheid to tell people that actually God wants you to respect your leaders. I mean, our generosity was completely used against us. We're generous people. When the people who colonized us came, and the people shared and gave them, whether it was land, a piece of land, or the animals, there wasn't any thought in their minds that these things would be stolen from them. Because for us it would be sharing, it's all of our things. It doesn't belong to some of us, and then, but and if you don't, you can read about the history of what actually happened, the atrocities that happened there. So in my work then, and I think in my family, this was the spaces where we could have a lot of discussion. I would sometimes, when we come home from church, I would ask, do you really think Jesus said those words? So in that space, it was like our theological, engagement. We didn't talk about people. In fact, I never heard my mother gossip about anybody. It's like a waste of time. I'm like, really, why do you gossip about other people? Talk about yourself. There's so much to think and figure out and whatever. So in our family, it would be becoming reflective. So that was the sermon this morning. So what do you think about that? When we come home from school and we were troubled and upset about what was going on in our communities, my parents would say to us, so what do you expect to do something about it? Because if you are disturbed about it, maybe God is disturbing you because you are supposed to do something about it. So that's the kind of teaching, that I come from. And we could reflect critically about our faith, not about other people's faith, about your own faith. Ask questions about your own beliefs. The beliefs, the Christian or faith, whatever faith you belong to, those beliefs that you have, who told you to believe what you believe? And are those beliefs life-giving? Is it life-affirming? Is it adding value to people's lives? When you challenge somebody, is it challenging somebody from a place of love and care and respect? Or is it coming from a place of fear and judgment? In our family, there was spaciousness for critical reflection. But the question always came back, so what are you doing about what you are concerned about? And so in my work then, as I struggled to find a place where I could talk about the work and even move the sector, my colleagues, to see the importance of working with men, because how do we not work with men if we have statistics that says 1 in every 4 women finds herself in an abusive relationship? Every 26 seconds a woman is raped in South Africa. If we have, and of course these statistics are of course unreliable, because when that kind of personal violations happen, you don't just go and report to everybody that this is what's happening to you, right? So these are some of the statistics that comes out. So we can imagine, the statistics in the US, but also in the world, 1 in every 3 women finds herself in an abusive relationship in the world. So this is what we're talking about. And so for us then, it was important that we speak about how do we engage men. Because if men are we know that not all men violate. I just told you about my dad. I'll tell you later that we started a project, to kind of focus on some of the men like my dad, who's never used violence and abuse. But through our work, we have to focus very specifically on men's violence against women, and what is the intersections with faith. And so SAFI, we established SAFI in 2008. After I left my work at the shelter, I moved into establishing the South African Faith and Family Institute. But also, just to say something before that, it was years of research. I did my master's thesis on the challenges that clergy face in addressing domestic violence, because I didn't just want to work on the antidote, to the stuff that I knew from having spoken to women. I wanted to study this and to make sure that, that we're not just talking about a general concern, but it's actually steeped in research. And so I've done a lot of visiting. Some of the programs I visited here, that was actually the very first visit to the US that I met Dr. Oliver Williams. And that was such a relief when I came to Minnesota. I'm like, because I actually said to God, I'm sure there must be somebody in the world that are doing the work. I didn't want to reinvent the wheel. I didn't think I was the first person to think about, to work with men or to work with clergy. It was just like, where are these people? Can I find them? And so forth and so on. So anyway, so I just want to say there's been a lot of research that went into before we started SAFI eventually at the beginning of 2008. And I have to say it was only much later in 2008 that I came to the US. So that period with the Humphrey Fellowship was a good period it was like a sabbatical, which I needed, because I was in the shelter for almost 15 years. And I was going to go straight into the work of SAFI. And so the good professionals here would say that you need to take a break. And so I think that Humphrey Fellowship year was a very, very crucial time of refining and clarifying and just recuperating and, for myself. So, and that was when I met Bill. That was wonderful. Okay, so SAFI, our mission, the mission of SAFI is really to advance a coordinated, multi-sectoral, cultural, competent, restorative justice response to violence against women and children by being a resource to religious leaders as they hold offenders accountable and ensure the safety and empowerment of victims, survivors, by offering opportunity for truth-telling and healing of individuals and families. And then also to challenge from a theological perspective patriarchal traditions and other root causes of intimate partner abuse by offering opportunity, which destroys, so we want religious leaders to, from a theological perspective, when we talk about working with religious leaders, we're basically saying a woman who finds herself in an abusive relationship shouldn't have to choose between her faith and her safety. If she is a Muslim woman, if she's devout, if I'm a Pentecostal Christian woman and I'm a devout Christian, don't come and challenge me about my faith still. Because that's my source of hope, whether you think I'm crazy or not. But what SAFI is saying, we're saying to the faith leaders, it's your responsibility to clarify scriptures and teachings that is being misused and that is distorted. So if I, as a victim, are holding on to certain scriptures that is actually unhelpful, or certain Christian beliefs, it helps me far more that my Pentecostal pastor comes to me and clarify those scriptures than a social worker that tries to tell me that there's something wrong or problematic about what I believe. You get what I'm saying? And so the point really through SAFI's work is, that's why we say in our mission we want faith leaders to challenge from a theological perspective the root causes of violence against women, right? Because it is, though, of course we know violence against women, intimate partner abuse, destroys the dignity of women, children, and men. It destroys the dignity of humanity. And then also to encourage and promote scriptures and theological teachings that encourage intimate relationships that set people free to live their full potential in intimate unions. Now, really, I don't feel a need to know what is the sexual orientation of people. This is my position. I feel we are wasting a whole lot of time trying to regulate and monitor other people's intimate lives, especially when it comes to what we do with our bodies. Each one of us know what our own faith position is. And so what we encourage faith leaders is that, when you deal with people who are in intimate relationships that's abusive and oppressive, do you understand that that person cannot really live their full potential, whatever God had intended for them to be? Right? If I was in an abusive relationship, Safi probably would not exist. Because my priority would be to just be safe, to find safety. My husband would not be able to live his potential because somehow he has a belief that he has to control me. And some of those teachings come from some of the teachings that's misinterpreted in Scripture. And so we encourage religious leaders and say, listen, you have to think about what it is that you preach and teach. How does this land with people in their intimate relationships? Are these teachings and preachings assisting people to flourish, to thrive? Or are people literally living their lives on the edge, constantly thinking, am I dying tomorrow? Am I being raped again tonight? Men whom you have access to, those men come to your faith communities, you still have access. They sit there, because I work with men who abuse their intimate partners as well. And so when you have access to those men, when you offer cheap forgiveness, you are destroying the potential, the opportunity for that man to get a grip on his own humanity and his own need for healing and his need to step into his destiny, his purpose that would make him flourish, that would give him a full life, that doesn't depend on whether his wife or his partner, respects him so much that he feels like the man. It's like, come on, we need to sort of break these things down. We have these notions but it destroys our lives. And so for as long as we keep on just teaching and talking the same stuff, people suffer. People suffer, children grow up, the next generations and generations, we just destroy ourselves unnecessarily. And so we say faith leaders have this responsibility because we cannot ask magistrates and judges to clarify Scripture, cannot ask social workers to clarify Scripture. We cannot ask the police. The only people that can clarify Scriptures and teachings and beliefs that people hold about what God requires of them in their intimate relationships are faith leaders. And so for Safi, it's also very important the way we work with religious leaders. We don't believe in shaming and blaming people. We say we come from a context where religious leaders haven't been trained how to deal with issues of domestic violence. And so oftentimes they will deal with it as if it's a marital problem. Now there's a difference between a marital problem and when it actually is domestic violence and abuse. In a marital problem, both partners can be quite strong and very assertive in stating their case. Nobody will feel afraid, that they might lose their lives, right? In an intimate abusive, when there's that dynamic, one of the partners literally feel that their lives are in danger. And so they cannot be completely honest. And so it becomes dangerous when you go to counseling to your faith leader and the faith leader just automatically see both of you together. In fact, what happens is even the perpetrator does not get the real help, because there's a different way in which you engage with somebody who has perpetrated, abuse against another human being. You do not use the same strategies. But again, there's life-giving ways of doing that. And these are the things that we talk to faith leaders about. I'm going to jump because I know that I can speak a lot and there's and I'd like for maybe a little bit more interaction and engage. Oh, we've got a couple of minutes left, but I wanted to just show you. So we have training that we offer. We give a workshop, then a 5-day training, and then a 10-week or 10-themed series. And the whole idea is that the faith community must become like places of hope and healing, true sanctuaries of hope and healing to individuals and families who experience intimate partner abuse. So we get religious leaders to participate in that 10-week series, and of course the training. 2 years ago, 2017, we started an initiative called MAD, which stands for Men Affirming Dignity, because I figured if there must be more men like my dad. Because if you go to South Africa or you research colored men, because remember, I've got to start at home. So I'm from the colored community, and I figured there must be colored men like my dad. Because if you Google colored men on the Cape Flats in South Africa, the main things that pops up is gangsters, drug addicts, they're destructive, they're violent, and all of that. I don't have that experience. And I figured that there are probably more men like my dad who probably will not get into the media because they get on with their lives. They don't have a need to be known and to be seen, right? And so this initiative then is about beginning to identify who are the men who's been affirming dignity in the lives of women and communities and families and so forth. So we've spoken to the museum, one of the museums, national museums in South Africa, because we want it to be part of our social history that needs to be captured. Because right now, the history would say colored men are violent. And so this for us is not just about putting out documentaries and stories, but it needs to be written into history. That how does colored men on the Cape Flats navigate their humanity? Because this is what it's about. It's being human. It's natural to not be violent. That is what is natural. So anyway, so we'll see. And so this initiative also, we're putting together like an exhibition which will be in the museum, but we also want to take the exhibition to different schools and in different communities, where we then want schools and communities who connects with this initiative to then begin to identify who are the men in their lives that have been affirming dignity. We begin another conversation, and we kind of talk back at this popular dominant narrative that colored men are violent or black men are violent, essentially, right? So then, of course, we have a theological advisory council. I don't know if you can see, but it's a multi-faith. So we have theologians from various different religions We try and get a woman and a man at least from the different faiths. We get it right and we don't get it right in certain instances because we are still also learning. But the idea, what this council does is they help to identify, or they help to demystify scriptures and teachings that's easily misinterpreted. And they also help identify resources within scriptures and teachings from these various traditions. Okay? And there's just some pictures of, some of the events that we've had. This person is the Anglican, after Archbishop Desmond Tutu. He was the following Archbishop, and I got him to be the patron of the Theological Advisory Council on Gender-Based Violence. And there's just two of the publications that we've put together from that council. The first one was on root causes of violence against women. What do we learn from scripture and teach, from our scriptures and ancient teachings? The second publication was or is on faith-based interventions with male perpetrators of domestic violence. And again, what are the resources that we get from scriptures and teachings? And then there's some of the conferences that we have where we invite some of them to come and speak, on these various topics. And that's just another example. The Muslim Judicial Council, because that's the intention. Through SAFI's work, we basically want faith communities to get on with their own work. We don't have to be there, facilitate everything, but to be a catalyst so that faith communities amongst themselves begin to have the conversation and recognize the people within their own faith community that have been doing this work for who knows how long. And so this was last year when, this is Dr. Oliver Williams, when he visited, with us as we were celebrating our 10th anniversary as SAFI. So this was the third year that the Muslim Judicial Council had their annual, campaign. And then, of course, we had a specific one on African traditional religions, which we believe is quite critical. We need to recover indigenous knowledges. What is the African traditional religion before apartheid, before colonialism? And why is that still not really been spoken about a lot? So we had specific sessions with that. We had sessions with the Jewish community. And again, in the Jewish community, it was also quite interesting that they invited us to come and speak. There was like spate of violence and rapes, terrible things that happened, sort of a particular time. They invited us, and through that conversation, they had launched a 3-month campaign within their own community, where they started to campaign and educate and really reflect critically about what's going on within their own faith community. I don't know if you know Desmond Tutu, his daughter, the picture in the middle, Mpho Tutu, she's our patron, one of our patrons of the organization of SAFI. And so that's just some of the examples of how we also draw on women faith leaders from various faith traditions. More of those pictures. And then we've put together a short, like a 30-second, the media people will probably call it public service announcements, where we got religious leaders, just 30 seconds, like quickly give a message, from their particular tradition. So some of that information, you will be able to get it on YouTube, actually. It's called Take a Stand. So we had religious leaders to call their own faith communities, but also the community at large, to take a stand against violence against women. I'm going to leave it at that. We have a couple of moments, I think. Yeah? Bill?
Thank you, Elizabeth. Anybody have any questions they want to ask Elizabeth for what she shared?
Thank you for a stimulating presentation. My question is this. Who has been most resistant to your work? Has it been men in the families, or has it been the faith leaders?
Okay. Shall I just respond immediately, Paul? Okay. I have to say, I think, because I've been involved with it for so long, I think initially it was the organizations that did the work, that already have been working with victims and survivors of domestic violence. Because traditionally, if you remember, there was always sort of tension between the feminist movement or the women's movement and the faith sector when it comes to the issue of domestic violence. Because the activists or the advocates, domestic violence advocates, had often critiqued the faith leaders for forcing women to be submissive, and thus being part of the problem. Faith leaders, on the other hand, would critique the advocates for breaking up families. And so I think the challenge for Safi's work was to place ourselves in a very particular position. It was more the positioning, because we are not here to proclaim or to promote any particular faith, right? We are talking everywhere, wherever there's a faith community. So maybe for some faith communities who would have preferred that we only speak and promote a particular theology, a particular doctrine, they would maybe feel a little bit uncomfortable if they are sitting together with people from other religions, or even within the Christian tradition, there were some folk that wouldn't sit around the same table within the Christian tradition. But I think our approach, because the focus has been on domestic violence as the common issue that all faith leaders are struggling with, I think that has broken down a lot of, the difficulty, or what could potentially be things where people feel threatened. Because and our approach is also, we didn't come to teach you anything. As religious leaders, you are called, this is your ministry. We didn't come to train you, to teach you, to shame you. We're coming to share. This is a woman of faith, this is what she experienced. If she's Christian, if she's Muslim, if she's Hindu, if whatever her faith is, this is what she is struggling with. The men that I work with in the perpetrator group, these are the scriptures and teachings that they believe. And so it was more that we are coming alongside you as faith leaders. And so for some, they may feel that they are ready for that, and others may not. But I haven't really kept track of thank you, though. Yeah.
Good evening.
Hi.
Thank you for your presence here and your presentation.
Thank you.
And your insights. I would like for you to speak to and give your perspective on how do you address when the perpetrators of violence is oftentimes coming from within the faith community, particularly the Catholic Church.
I think, again, our point of entry is we talk to religious leaders. Now, of course, I know, because I work with men, and I know that there are some religious leaders who are perpetrators. But again, using the same kind of approach, the approach is, we're speaking to you as faith leaders. And when you are the perpetrator, it's very, you're not just gonna say to people, I've done this, I've just, treated somebody like crap, or I've just done all these terrible things. We always find a way to minimize the atrocities that we inflict on others. But it's very different when we talk, kind of generally sometimes as a point of entry. What I must say, I'm remembering a number of instances that when we were having workshops, and I remember this one particular day when at the end of we had a circle, and we were holding hands as just sort of bringing everything together before we leave. And one of the religious leaders, he disclosed, I've just been in court for the last couple of months, and I've just realized that I am the perpetrator. So he disclosed. Another person in that same group said, this is the first time that I'm in a domestic violence or any workshop where I didn't feel like I had to make excuses for my sexual orientation. So I guess what we are very sensitive about through our work as SAFI is we are very aware that there's so many of our people that have been dehumanized through apartheid and oppression. And so we are very sensitive,
The library will be closing in 15 minutes at 8 o'clock.
about
All
holding
materials checked out by that time.
holding people's humanity in a sacred way. And also encouraging, making it normal for us to know that we have agency. Each one of us, based on how ready we are to step in and step out and do our work and so forth. And then of course, quickly with the religious leaders and some of the senior religious leaders that we work with, we also encourage them to begin to look critically at their screening processes. And another example that I want to mention is one of the bishops had called me to ask, first they asked us to come and counsel women who have complainants. And I said, I need to sit down with you as the bishop. And I said, actually, it's quite fine to see the complainants, but I want to see the perpetrator. And in this instance, the perpetrator was 70-odd-year-old priest who has, basically over the years, this is what he's been doing. And he's just been moved from one community to the next. And so in the wisdom of this bishop, he agreed, and I said, I want to see this person. I want to see his wife, his family depending. So I saw him, we made a recommendation. He went into a sex offender treatment program. And so these are the things that we encourage churches to say, you can act as if this is not happening. You will be called to account publicly in the courts of law. And so there's an offering. SAFI is not saying we will be the shortcut, but we are saying there might be a more comprehensive way, to assist everybody that's involved. Because we also say if faith communities cannot assist the perpetrator, then we are in serious trouble. Because we can think that we can lock everybody up. That's not going to take the problem away. And I believe that faith communities are the one sector in society that can help to call people out of the darkest places, that some of us go. And so that's what we encourage. So that's an offering, to the church to say, stop acting as if this is not happening. It's happening. Put certain things in place. You cannot just do this internally by yourself. Get outside organizations in to help regulate and help you and hold you accountable.